In this episode, we will look at Chapter 3 of Unstuck in Time, Memoir of a Time Traveler. I remember Mei Ling. The idea of karma as a sort of Old Testament eye for an eye justice is not the whole picture. From Understanding Karmic Complexes by Patricia Walsh. Famine spread across the southern China countryside like a locust swarm, devastating everything in its path, including Mei Ling's family's village. Her family would surely starve unless they did something they had never dreamt of doing. Mei Ling was the answer to their dilemma. She was sold as a concubine to the old wealthy patriarch. Her mother told her of the decision as she bound Mei Ling's feet and pressed them into her lotus slippers. "I packed your hairpin along with combs," her mother said as she braided Mei Ling's long black hair, weaving in the ribbons she had worn on her wedding day. When the patriarch saw Mei Ling with her ama at the temple one day, when she had stopped to rest her feet, he knew he must have her. Her tiny bound feet made her attractive to the patriarch, and her young age and virginity increased his lust for her. Knowing she was bought for enough food to feed her family, Mei Ling wept behind the red veil as she entered the palanquin, sent to carry her to the patriarch's estate. The ceremony at the ancestral hall was not elaborate, and then she was escorted to her bedroom. She sat on the king, draped in red fabric. The smell of herbs from the red veil that had covered her face for hours, and the red dress that had been stored with the hopes of an auspicious wedding, were suffocating. Mei Ling sat trembling in anticipation of the moment he would open the door. She felt a flush of fear as a creaking sound from the door told her that the patriarch had entered the room. She smelled wine on his breath as he lifted the veil and then forced himself on her. She felt dirty afterwards, but dared not show her true feelings. To make matters worse, the Tai, the number one wife, treated Mei Ling like her personal slave. Mei Ling felt abused by both. She felt abandoned by her birth family, and yet she knew she was responsible for their survival. Mei Ling felt as helpless and as useless as her bound feet. She could not physically run away, but she could find a way to escape. Mei Ling lost herself in her thoughts until a plan began to take form. She could not easily walk far unattended, but she was determined to find a way to escape this living hell. The young concubine observed the servants who walked easily on unbound feet, who lifted trays, baskets, and pots with ease. Mei Ling knew she too needed to be strong. She tried picking up a basket filled with clothes, but it seemed impossible. Every day, Mei Ling tried again and again. She felt the pull in her biceps until one day she could lift the basket a few inches off the floor. She lifted it a little more the next day and the next, until she lifted it with an ease she had never known. Of course, she did these exercises unbeknownst to anyone in the household. It was not easy, but Mei Ling found ways to sneak away from the family entourage and servants. She was not sure why it was so important for her to build up her strength, but she felt good that one part of her could feel strong when the rest of her life was so utterly helpless. Mei Ling lay awake at night while the others slept. The light of the full moon intrigued her. She studied the shadows long after the last person had finally settled within his or her quarters. She listened to the frogs and crickets, the breeze blowing through the bamboo grove. She visualized each part of the garden outside her quarters, and even the service garden just beyond the gate. A bustle of noises came from the service garden, especially early in the morning. Servants drew water from the well for old Cook. They fished carp out of the pond and gathered fresh vegetables. Mei Ling became keenly aware of all the sounds in the compound and wondered why she was so oblivious to them before. One morning, as old Cook prepared a special feast for the festival of the hungry ghost, Mei Ling heard him admonish his apprentice, who accidentally bumped a pot on the edge of the well. Mei Ling heard the pot hit the walls of the well, but it seemed like a long time before she heard the pot splash as it hit the water. The apprentice tried to catch the pot and almost fell into the well. Luckily, old Cook's quick reaction saved the apprentice. "Ay, ya! It is bad enough I have lost the pot. You could have fallen in, you silly, useless boy," old Cook said as he slapped the apprentice on his head. Mei Ling realized how she would escape. Knowing festivals were always noisy and busy in the household, she could get away with all kinds of mischief without being noticed. The next big festival would be the Lunar New Year. In fact, it was their biggest celebration. It was only a few months away, which gave Mei Ling time to put her plan into action. Each night she listened. By day she practiced lifting the basket and watching everyone, watching for cues to help her follow through with her plan. She played up to the old Cook. It was not difficult. "How do you make the fish taste so good?" she asked. He showed her the pond where the fresh fish swam among the lemongrass. "The secret is to pluck the fish out moments before it is cooked," he said. In this way, she gained access to the service garden, where Mei Ling looked around and made a mental note of every square inch. The time for the New Year's celebration drew nearer. Mei Ling rehearsed her plan in her mind. On the evening of the Chinese New Year, when everyone was finally asleep, she slipped out of her bed and crawled across the room, keeping her body low. She pulled her body over the threshold, using her upper body strength. From the women's courtyard, she crawled rather than walked, to avoid the risk of falling and waking the family or servants, to the gate that led to the service courtyard. She deftly moved past the pond and placed a red envelope by the rock where she knew the cook liked to sit. She pressed on towards the well, where she used the strength of her arms to pull herself up on the edge of the well. At last, she would be free, but not before the pain of helplessness broke through the wall that she had built around herself. It was not as solid as the stone wall of the well. She sobbed for the loss of everything she held dear. "Damn you, patriarch! Damn you, Tai Tai! Damn this hell you put me in!" With those last words, Mei Ling threw her body over the wall, and like the cook's pot, she bounced against the sides of the well and splashed into the dark, watery abyss. The water quickly soaked her quilted robe and pulled her body down. Her body felt heavy, and yet she felt a snap, a jerk, and knew she was no longer in her body. Mei Ling's spirit looked down at the lifeless body. She heard noises, old Cook's padded feet shuffling, the softer step of the apprentice. The old Cook sat at his favorite place on the pond's edge. His hand rested on the red paper envelope, and when he opened it, he found the gold coin. "Merciful heavens!" he exclaimed. Mei Ling was pleased to see his joy. Then she heard the apprentice scream. He saw her body in the bottom of the well. Cook ran to the apprentice and looked down. "Such a bad omen! Bad luck for the new year. Mei Ling shuddered. She had wanted to punish the patriarch and the Tai. Now she realized that others would be hurt too. Suddenly she knew her attempt to be free was in vain. What have I done? An old woman appeared out of a mist. She motioned to Mei Ling to follow her. Amma, what have I done? The old woman, who looked like Mei Ling's Amma, wrapped her arms around Mei Ling and silently guided her through the gate to the other side. Amma, how is it that you are here with me? Mei Ling said, remembering her Amma's death, but sensing something different about her. Where are we going? She followed, walking as if with unbound feet. Amma walked in silence. Her pace was quick and steady, no longer crippled. Her hair was thick and shiny black, like fresh ink on the inkstone, not salt and peppered, thinning strands. What is going on? Where are we? Let's go to the temple, Amma said. The familiar sound of monks chanting beckoned Mei Ling toward the ancestral altar, where the smoky clouds of incense filled the air. Mei Ling fell to her knees, remembering her last words. What have I done? A gentle voice said, Do not be so hard on yourself, child. Feeling ashamed, Mei Ling did not want to raise her head, but the love she felt in that moment was more than she had ever known. A gentle touch on her shoulder soothed her. Mei Ling turned around, expecting to see Amma, but she was nowhere to be found. Do not be afraid, child, a beautiful woman said. Are you Kuan Yin? Can you tell me where I am? What is happening? The beautiful woman glowed in a sparkling light that surrounded her blue silk robe. She seemed to float in the air. It is normal to feel confused in the beginning, but soon you will remember and understand. Take your time to become familiar, to remember. You have been through a lot. Compassion. That is what Mei Ling felt in the presence of the lady. Surely she must be the goddess of compassion and mercy. They walked through the temple garden and passed by a well which triggered a strange sensation for Mei Ling, like waking from an elusive dream. She realized she felt as if she were half awake, unsure if she were dreaming or awake. She remembered Chuang Tzu's poem about dreaming he was a butterfly. She sensed that she, like Chuang Tzu, was going through a transition, a transformation of material things. With that thought, Mei Ling suddenly found herself in a building unlike any she had ever seen before. It had a glass domed ceiling and glass walls, let in the light in every direction. She was surrounded by thousands of butterflies. She delighted in their antics frolicking in the air. Free! They feel so free! Am I free at last? She said out loud, remembering how she had longed for freedom. Memories fluttered through her mind, fleeting images of the patriarch breathing heavily, whispering seductively into her ear. Piles of fabric to be mended or embroidered as the Tai watched close by for any mistake. The grief-stricken look in her mother's eyes when Mei Ling entered the palanquin that sealed her fate. Then, the moment at the well, the moment she had hoped would set her free. She saw old Cook's horror, followed by the Tai anger. But what hit her the hardest was seeing her mother's grief when she heard the news about her daughter's death, and the stain her selfish act would leave on her family's honor. I was so foolish, so selfish. How could I do such a thing?" "You are much too hard on yourself, child," the beautiful woman said. "Yes, what you did was wrong, but you will have another opportunity to make it right with yourself. And because you cursed them, we see that you will reunite again and make it right with them as well." A glimmer of hope flickered in Mei Ling, and with this shift the scene around her changed. Mei Ling and Kuan Yin stood on an arched rainbow bridge like the one in the famous Song Dynasty painting along the river during the Qingming festival. "It's time for you to go now," Kuan Yin said. "This is as far as I can go with you. But do not worry, for others will meet you, and they will prepare you for the next step along the way. Take this with you." She handed a scroll to Mei Ling. The calligraphy was stunning. The message was even more so. "The road ahead is long and has no ending, yet high and low. I will search with my will unbending." A poem by Chu Yuan. I'm ready to go. Thank you for guiding me. I will try to do better next time. Backstory. My relationship with both of my parents was a precarious one. I felt a victim of circumstances. I felt guilty for being the reason they were forced into a biracial marriage, only to find out many years later that they were not even married. I sought professional help when I began remembering being molested by my father. Flashbacks invaded my life, triggered by a touch, a smell, and even a taste. For instance, after years without having dim sum, my favorite Chinese food, a restaurant in Tampa opened that served it. The experience was bittersweet. I enjoyed the dim sum carts loaded with my favorite dishes weaving between the tables, just as I had experienced as a child. But the sensation of steamed chashu bao, barbecued pork buns, on my tongue awakened memories that lay dormant for 20 years. Then, experiencing sex was overshadowed by flashbacks of my father's voice, his touch, and fear that gripped me like a monster. 40 years after that horrific night, I was at a workshop where the pungent fragrance from a jar of Tiger Balm stirred more memories of what had happened. I tried to suppress the memories again to get on with my life, but they would not go away. I forced myself to try to talk about it in therapy, pushing back the memories of being told to be quiet, to not tell anyone, but years of subconsciously being afraid of trusting authority figures made it difficult to speak up. However, when my father died in 1990, 33 years after we had run away from him, and 22 years after I had reunited with him, I was grief-stricken because we did not resolve the trauma that plagued me. I felt destined to have a life cursed by the past. Then I began to realize the deep-seated anger I felt toward my mother as I sorted out the memories from the past. I questioned why I was the one who slept with my father, and why she did not comfort me when I confessed to her what had happened. Next, I remembered my mother's boyfriend who acted inappropriately toward me in front of my mother, and she did nothing about it. I began to understand my anger and lack of trust of her as well as my father, and how that transferred to other authority figures. I remember the conversation between my mother and my elementary school teacher about me working in the school cafeteria so my younger brother and sister and I could eat a hot meal at lunch, and how responsible I felt for our survival. Remembering my grandchildren's immaturity as preteens, I remembered as a 12-year-old the weight of responsibility I felt when we moved to Pensacola and how I felt caring for my brother and sister. I remember how scared I felt, especially when Mom worked the graveyard shift and we were left alone. Looking back, I realized how fast I grew up. Only later did I realize how much I had suppressed and the myriad of coping mechanisms I used to function, as well as the thoughts and decisions I created during the traumatic years. Opening to my ability to speak to ghosts after Dad died was the beginning of my spiritual awakening. The conversations with Dad's spirit helped me heal the unresolved issues, and as if to show me that my experiences were not my imagination, he also gave me information to help me with my genealogical research. As I resolved issues with Dad's spirit and felt peace about my relationship with him, albeit across the dimensions of time and space, I turned my focus on what I could do to heal the conflict with my mother, hopefully while she was still in the physical world. Even though I was fortunate to resolve the issues with my dad on the other side, my higher self explained that the healing process was more profound if it was accomplished in the physical dimension. I asked my higher self how my mother could have set me up by putting me in Dad's bedroom, and why she did not comfort and support me as I thought a mother should. Those questions hung as if suspended in air until I attended Brian Weiss's workshop about reincarnation in Naples, Florida in 1993. When he made the statement that we choose our parents, my angry reaction surprised me. He guided us into a regression. In my journey, I experienced what it was like observing the growing fetus, but floating outside my mother's body, yet very much aware of what was going on with the fetus. My parents were arguing, Dad cursing in Toisanese and Mom shouting back at him. It was as if I experienced their feelings as well as my own. It was a brief exercise, so I was not able to complete the journey. By that time, I knew enough about the process to pick up the journey where I had left off and follow it through to what it was trying to show me. I was guided to the moment in the non-physical world before this incarnation when I chose my parents. My vision of the life between lives looked ancient and futuristic at the same time. Masters in white robes made of a fabric I did not recognize stood around a long conference table made of a dark, glass-like material. However, the surface did not have hot spots or a glare from the lighting. Embedded in the surface was a scrolling imagery that moved with the wave of the master's hand. Scenes like previews of coming attractions whizzed by quickly until I shouted, "Stop! That's the one!" The scene was of my mother and father in a passionate embrace. "I choose them," I said with a confidence I could not explain. Without fully understanding the circumstances, I knew that this was an opportunity of a lifetime, and that I was not a victim, but a willing participant in the opportunity to heal, to balance the karma from the past. The images on the table monitor changed to the scene in the patriarch's estate, and I understood why I felt Chinese, why my mother in this life, the Tai in that, handed me, the concubine, over to my father in this life, the patriarch in the other life. I understood my father's unconscious attraction to me and my distrust of my parents. In 2002, I found a transpersonal psychologist to help me with PTSD after the 9/11 attack, which triggered flashbacks of my childhood. When news reports replayed the attack on the second tower, I replayed the moment I huddled helplessly with my brother and sister as I stared at our telephone. I wanted to call for help as my father chased my mother through the house. He held his cleaver in his hand and threatened to kill her in front of us, but I froze in fear. My therapist understood the benefit of regression therapy and encouraged me to use self-hypnosis to regress back to the memories that were bubbling up. Her encouragement helped me process the memories and helped me communicate with my mother in a better way. When a flashback repeated like a continuous loop video, I embraced it. I saw my hands as a 3-year-old child pressed up against the train window. I felt my heart race with anticipation, tinged with fear. My therapist helped me compose a letter to Mom about my memory. She advised me to give Mom permission to say that she could not talk about the past, but to my surprise, Mom replied to my letter and told me about the time we ran away from Dad when I was 2 years old, but returned when I was 3 years old. A memory hidden in the caves of my subconscious for over 50 years. In 2012, I sought the help of Carol Bowman to go deeper into the memory of my father molesting me. I had retrieved most of the memory, but I felt blocked at the points just before and after I escaped him. I knew I needed to ask for help, so I scheduled an appointment with Carol Bowman on my way back from my first past life regression training with Brian Weiss. After a week of training and practicing regression therapy, I was determined to break through the protective walls I had built in my mind. Bowman used deep memory process, a technique developed by Roger Woolger, Ph.D. It was different from what I learned with Weiss or Cataldo. It worked. I finally remembered how I escaped and what I did while I waited for Mom to come home from work. I recognized why I kept a vigilant watch in times of stress and why I felt emotionally abandoned by my mother when I needed her support and comfort. I realized the cause of my distrust of authority figures and why I built the walls around me. And then I remembered more about Mei Ling and how she escaped, albeit by suicide. I remembered her curse just before she slid her body over the wall and into the depths of the well. Mei Ling's curse on the patriarch and Tai Tai created a powerful emotional charge between my parents and me. We came together again as an opportunity to heal the past. I saw my parents not only as imperfect adults, but also as unconscious beings acting from a script played out hundreds of years ago in another life. There was something very potent in this memory. Not only did the memories give me a deeper understanding of my present life, but it helped me connect the dots about many issues that ordinary psychotherapy could not help me work through. Trust issues, feeling responsible for the survival of others, fear of authority figures, feeling powerless and unworthy. So many issues intertwined. Energetic memories from a past life were embedded within the dynamics of my family's power plays, abuse and boundary issues, and communication skills were disentangled as I remembered and integrated the information. In this case, the changes took time and perseverance. In the process, I learned to trust the universe and that everything was happening in divine order. My relationship with Mom improved. She did not acknowledge or apologize for what she did and did not do, but as my understanding about her from a current and past life perspective helped me forgive and accept her, I was able to be a compassionate caretaker in the last years of her life. I took to heart what Kuan Yin said about not being too hard on myself and others, and trusting that we will have more opportunities to grow.